Thanks, Gil. And I echo his sentiments. It's so wonderful to see this many people all here together. We are, everybody's vaccinated, and for the most part, we'll all be wearing masks. So I do encourage you to use your name tags and keep those as visible as possible, because if you're like me, I don't always recognize people when all I see is this part of them. So thank you so much for all coming. I want to thank our sponsors. Centerpoint Energy, Exelon, NYPA, EPRI, Black & Veatch, AEP, Anterix, Oracle, Itron, Hitachi Energy, GE, TRC, and a supporting organization, Public Utilities Fortnightly. There are press here. There is press here. So, feel free to seek them out and give them our message. Today, we're going to hear from some of the key drivers about the evolution of the grid, the federal climate and energy policy, from a FERC commissioner and White House official to state officials who are leading the charge on reducing carbon emissions, to our member companies and others making investments in everything from electric vehicles to renewable energy to the grid equipment that, as we talk about, is the platform for decarbonization. And we'll be talking about the implications of policy and procurement goals on the grid. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping in addition to the masks and name tags. For our remote audience, and we do have a remote audience, just so you know, this is a hybrid event, so we do have not quite as many people online as in person, but it's a large group of people participating in this event. It's a very big priority for GridWise Alliance to deepen our relationships with state and local officials, since so much of the work that you all do is done at the state and local level in addition to the federal aspect. So we offered free registration to state and local officials. So we have a fair amount of those officials joining us as well. So really the implications for policy at all levels of government, for grid investments at all levels of government, is going to be a theme that you'll hear about throughout the day. For our remote audience, use the Q&A field to ask any questions that you have at any given time. We're monitoring that Q&A live, and we'll try to incorporate as many of those questions into our Q&A sessions as possible. And for the Q&A that we don't get to, or the queue that we don't get to, we'll use that as fodder for blogs throughout the coming months to really address those issues. So first, I would be remiss if I didn't thank, and you'll hear me thank for the next 2 days, profusely the work of my team to make this happen. We could not be here without them. I basically disappeared for 2 months, and they made this happen. So thank you to Richie and Malika and Aurora and Josh and Shalia. So you'll hear me over and over again, and do thank them when you see them in person. So let's get on to the federal perspective on decarbonization. We're going to start off with hearing from FERC Commissioner Allison Clements, and also a kind of fireside chat with Melissa Lavinson, two of my favorite women in energy. I've known both of them for, I hate to say it now, probably 2 decades or close to 2 decades. And it's really been a fabulous experience to watch all of us kind of grow into our energy careers. So Commissioner Allison Clements has 2 decades of, 2 decades of public and private sector experience in energy regulation and policy, representing utilities, independent power producers, developers, nonprofits, philanthropies, and others. She's the founder and president of Good Grid LLC, an energy policy and strategy consulting firm. She was at the Energy Foundation working with us. In fact, she helped enable a grant that we got from the Energy Foundation to help develop our grid investments for economic recovery package that we successfully advocated with Congress to create this big chunk of grid money that's in the infrastructure package. So thank you for that. I first encountered her when she spent a decade at the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I was also there. She was the general counsel and then the director of the Sustainable FERC project. So then Melissa will join us after the commissioner gives a few remarks. Melissa is in her new role as Senior VP for Federal Affairs at Exelon, and I might have butchered that title because it's new. You were previously in a similar role at PepCo, and before that, she was in a very similar role at PG&E, which is where I first met her when I was working for the Speaker from San Francisco. And she's also had a career of more than 20 years. In her dual role, she led a team responsible for the company's sustainability efforts, engagements, and strategies. So we are thrilled, and we're going to start off with you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Good morning. Oh, don't have to clap. I'm not sure which mic I'm on. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to put my coffee down. I didn't get the instructions. I was lurking over Karen because I was running late because my 4th grader, hi Rob, doesn't care about the future of the grid very much, despite my best efforts. It is really special to be back in person, and with Karen especially, it's not a surprise that GridWise is thriving in hard times, because if she's at the helm, things are going to go well. And she is certainly also one of my favorite women in energy, and there are so many of us. And I think we're all looking forward to getting back together and spending time together. I'll just provide some brief remarks, and then it's probably more interesting for Melissa and I to have conversation or to hear questions from you all. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is not, by design, a direct climate regulator. We're an economic regulatory body effectively tasked with protecting customers and ensuring reliability, regardless of what's going on around the commission in the world. That's, at its heart, the Federal Power Act side on the electricity side, which we're focusing on today, is a consumer protection statute. The reality is that the world is changing really quickly around us, and climate change implicates so many of the things we do every day and have to do to continue to satisfy that statutory obligation, which is to protect customers and ensure reliability. We have such a formidable challenge in climate change, and we have a system that wasn't planned to live up to it. It didn't focus on the types of resiliency the system needs. It didn't think about maximizing demand side in a way that helps to withstand extreme conditions or just what it will be now, the new normal set of conditions. So in my mind, it's critical that the Commission helps to facilitate the changing resource mix and addresses the systems challenges that we face. Because if we fail to do so, if we just look down, go proceeding by proceeding and pretend that this isn't all happening around us, we fail in our legal responsibilities. I'll talk a little bit about transmission policy and a little bit about the role of non-wires alternatives, and then we can pause there. So infrastructure is what we talk about these days. There is a massive requirement for, let's call it a once-in-a-generation investment in our transmission system. Over the past decade, there's been lots of money spent on transmission, and we've done the system operators and the transmission owners and developers have done well at certain types of transmission development, smaller projects, local projects, reliability projects. Those are kind of in hand, in check. There's a system that works for them. What's not getting done is the harder stuff, the bigger projects that serve both to provide resilience across regions and also to unlock the opportunity for low free fuel resources to provide low-cost energy to customers. That hasn't happened, and most of you know that the Commission's really focused on that right now. I think Chairman Glick and I, and probably all of you in your comments in some way, to the extent you're participating in our advance notice of proposed rulemaking process on transmission policy, are saying, yes, we need reform. There's broad consensus around the need, like everything else in life, of course, the devil's in the details, about how that gets done. I firmly believe we need a more holistic, proactive approach to ensure that the transmission gets done well, that it's sited in a way that is responsible and that allows for states to support its development, and that has a robust set of inputs and scenarios and considerations such that there is belief and buy-in to the need for any particular investment or set of investments. The left hand to the right hand or the right hand to the left hand of the transmission planning process is the interconnection queue. Interconnection queues are clogged around the country. They have turned into kind of an ill-suited de facto planning process where we battle out how the grid is going to grow in a setting that was never meant or intended to provide that service, and it doesn't fit particularly well. Developers, renewable energy developers are struggling with it. Transmission owners are struggling with it. RTOs and ISOs in the regions they exist are struggling with it. Nobody's happy with the way that it's going. So that's another thing right now at the Commission, side by side with the planning, that is very much on the table from my perspective, at least in terms of how we make good decisions now to unlock this need for transmission development. It's really important that we temper all of the conversation by saying this isn't just spending for the sake of spending. This isn't just an unfettered ability for transmission owners to earn returns. We have to be careful about making good choices, and I think there's three things that I keep saying we need to be doing. as part of this reform. One is to use the best available information about likely future scenarios. Yes, we will get it wrong. Yes, the planning process, the modeling will be wrong, but we can get within a set of parameters that helps us move forward while we continue to figure out kind of the 15, 20, 25-year horizon in advance. The second thing is we have to select transmission projects that maximize benefits to customers. That's easy, but it needs to be said. And I think it's really important that I'll be preaching to the choir in a lot of ways on this comment, but a decade ago when we were talking about Order 1000, public policy was a main driver for the type of resources coming online that require system changes, i.e. wind and solar projects, right? Today, it's one of many factors driving the changing resource mix, one very important of which is the cost of the provision of electricity, if we can get it right and support the integration of those resources reliably. And third, we have to have some oversight over the spending. I really believe this, and I keep talking about it at the Commission. If we aren't ensuring that the projects that get chosen benefit customers and are being done cost effectively, and that the way they get done ultimately is within some sort of reasonable range of the prediction, we're not protecting customers along the way. There is a lot of opportunity, a lot of commercial opportunity related to this need we have right now to update our grid. Everyone, that allows for alignment, and that's exciting, but we have to protect customers as we go along the way. The other thing I'll touch on is the role of non-wires alternatives for this group in particular. Now, at the federal level, as you know, we have some type of jurisdiction over the participation by distributed energy resources, by behind-the-meter storage, by the demand side in federal markets. On the market side, we've gotten some clarity around those jurisdictional boundaries. Over the course of the last 10 years, the Supreme Court and other courts have helped us to understand our lanes of jurisdiction, right? We know that there might be a resource that can participate in both a retail program and in a federally jurisdictional market. And yes, we're in the kind of throes of implementation of rules that are going to try and allow for that to happen. And there are parameters that haven't been figured out, but there's an understanding. On the transmission planning side, it's been a tougher nut to crack, in my experience at least. How do you leverage demand-side resources to avoid the need for some types of transmission investment? They can't replace all types of transmission investment, but some types. How do you do that when you've got a set of state jurisdictional resources on a federally jurisdictional transmission grid? And I think that's something that on paper was tried at the Order 1000 time a decade ago, but didn't really play out in terms of providing for really robust participation by demand-side resources as part of the solution set to identified system needs. I think the other piece of that, of course, is ensuring before we go forward with the determination that we need any type of resource is to get the maximum efficiencies out of the existing grid. And we've had a proposed rule out on grid enhancing technologies and are thinking hard about that as well. Again, it's not as straightforward as it should be relative to the potential benefits that these resources can provide. So with that, those are some of the things I'm thinking about on the infrastructure side, and I'll come sit down.
I might be introducing Allison and Melissa to each other for the first time on stage.
Get this off. Well, it's very nice to meet you personally. And Karen, thank you for inviting me to do this. And it's great to see so many friends, colleagues, everybody in person again. Like Gil said, like Karen said, like Allison said, it's really fantastic to be here. So I get the honor of moderating a conversation now between Karen and the commissioner.
Mostly the commissioner.
Mostly the commissioner. And so I know we will also be saving time for questions from the audience. So I just want to start out kind of at a high level, because I know Gil had mentioned it, and it's, I think, on probably a lot of people's minds and a lot of conversation around the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's a lot of money in the bill at the state and federal level to advance clean energy and resilience. And I was really, it was great to hear your remarks, Commissioner, kind of, and your focus and conversation around resilience and how we're going to be able to kind of drive decarbonization and do it in a way where we're building resilience going forward. So, you know, from your perspective, when you think about the distribution of the money and the impact, what do you think the impact will be maybe on the scope and scale of what you might see coming before you now in transmission investments? And how do you anticipate kind of FERC thinking about that, the balancing of the decarbonization, you know, vis-a-vis resilience investments? And I think you touched on it a little bit there, but I'd love to hear a little bit deeper conversation around that.
Yeah.
The infrastructure bill law is really important, and I didn't talk about it, and I think part of that's because the commission has a lot it has to do regardless of what happens with that. There are really important pieces of that law that will affect the way the commission goes about it. Well, I think it'll affect the way you all go about development of infrastructure and therefore what the commission's role will be. I think the money there for transmission, specifically the loan fund, and is important, and I'm also interested in how those details are going to work out. I think there's lots of other money that brings important stakeholders, including the states, to the table relative to figuring out what transmission is important from their perspective. The other piece, of course, is backstop siting authority. It's really interesting because it's been talked about a good deal, but not by the commissioners, that my colleagues and I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. Also, ultimately, this grand experiment of whether or not we'll build out a modern grid that effectively protects customers and provides the resilience you talk about depends on buy-in from states. So it doesn't, so I'd prefer we get there outside of the use of that authority, appreciating that it is a new tool in the toolbox.
Karen, your thought?
Well, I suspect both at the state level and the federal level, when utilities come before the federal commission or the state commission.
I got to do an all-employee meeting now.
Some feedback there. That the issue of cost recovery will be something that's on the table, and how you actually define the benefits of resilience, which is a little harder to actually quantify than a straight reliability investment. So I think when you think about $11 billion for resilience investments, that will have an enormous impact on strengthening the resilience of our distribution and transmission system. But I think it's a little more difficult conversation just because the data on the benefits and the costs are better than they were even 5 years ago, but still going to be an issue.
And Commissioner, you mentioned in your remarks, right, the concept of the modeling, right, and climate modeling, and the importance of understanding, right, and building for this new future. And when I think about that, I think there's the impact, right, on the consumer. There's the impact on reliability, and kind of on top of all that is the issue of equity, right? I know that's an issue important to you, important to GridWise, important to all of us. So as you think forward about kind of from your perspective, when you kind of see issues, policies coming before you, how do you kind of think about that equity lens? How do you sort of think about applying that when you think about investments to enable decarbonization or enable resilience? Sort of curious your personal perspective on that even.
Yeah. Well, I'm a one-trick pony on infrastructure. It's transmission in my head all the time, so it's hard to step outside of that. But from where I sit on transmission, there's equity in two parts. There's the siting piece of infrastructure. It doesn't matter what kind, stripe, color, type of infrastructure you're talking about. It's hard, and it impacts people, and it impacts communities, and that's real. And so we can take advantage of some of the best practices that have come out of the West and California, and trying to identify areas that are good places to site new infrastructure. We can look at existing right-of-ways. We can maximize the things that we do to not do additional harm relative to the existence of new steel in the ground. And then there's equity for people who are on the receiving end of getting energy into their homes. And it is admittedly attenuated and evolving for me how it comes into any given proceeding, because it's not a straight line to the person who receives the electricity at the end of the wire. But equity in that sense isn't about keeping your bill is not only about keeping your bill under a certain cost. It's about having choices to have clean energy and reliable energy and resilient energy, just like other people do, and making sure that communities have that opportunity. So that's another thing that lives around what the commission does, and I'm always looking for ways to make sure that we're bringing in the threads when they apply.
Well, I think that we anticipate, and we always use the message that all of this investment is going to translate into economic development and jobs. And I think that making sure that where those economic benefits land and who benefits from the growing job market is something that we have to pay attention to as well when we talk about equity.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think I know at our company at Exelon, I know in our industry writ large, right, there's a big focus on that piece of the as we make the transition, as we make the transformation, right, what are the opportunities, what's the talent needed, what's the skill set, and how are we going to invest for the future? And we're seeing it not just at the transmission level, but also, right, the distribution level. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit to that, because we're seeing this, right, fundamental transformation, and I think Gil touched on it, right? The grid as an enabler, the grid is a connector, right? It is the connection point for new technologies. It's the connection point for customers, right, to the new energy future. It's a connection point for people to jobs. And so, when I sort of think about the role that FERC is playing in that, and particularly most recently, right, with Order 745, 888, and now 2222, FERC is really having a fundamental impact on the transformation, not just at the transmission level, but distribution. And so, Commissioner, I know you've talked a little bit about, or a lot about transmission, you're focused on transmission, but clearly FERC is, creating the structure, starting to help create the structure of the distribution markets. So from your perspective, how do you see that kind of relationship, state, federal, on that side, and your thoughts about the evolution of that?
Sure. While I'm thinking of an answer, I'll hedge and say there are two proceedings before us on compliance with 2222, so I can't get into the specifics of the rule. This is the piece that I think you all know more about than we do, one of the pieces that you all know more about than we do, and that is so important. We do these rules that provide frameworks by which different kinds of resources can compete in the markets, and that's our job. What has to happen after that is the part that we've heard lots about, right? But we aren't responsible for doing. And so to me, I think it's really exciting to think about the technology that is providing that connection between the distribution system and the transmission system, or the retail markets and the wholesale markets, and the need for interoperability and the need for communications and situational awareness. There are several discrete things which I can't define exactly. I can't define the pieces in the way that many of you can, that all have to line up for that to now start talking about big volumes, right? Big volumes of distributed energy resources, providing a suite of services at the wholesale level that they're capable of providing. And if we can, that's to me such a critical key, because you get in this conversation about transmission versus distributed energy resources, and lots of us say yes, and I'm very much of that category. There's no study that demonstrates we're going to get there without the transmission interconnection, or without the flexibility that these resources are going to help provide, and the peak shaving and all the other good things they can do. So I think we've provided the outlines, the big framework outlines, but there's a lot to fill in still. And it'll be interesting to see what the commission does related to that.
And you've just teed up our afternoon discussion around the technology portfolio, which is going to look at the various technology solutions that can provide some of the grid functions that you're talking about, that will enable that kind of connectivity, the greater connectivity. I'm curious about the state-federal transmission task force, because that's a conversation that we started to try to have back when I was at DOE, with setting up some sort of permanent forum for state regulators and FERC regulators to have regular conversations about what the issues are coming at you, so that perhaps you could avoid ending up in Supreme Court and all that uncertainty while court cases are being decided.
Back to transmission. I hope that we don't end up in the Supreme Court. I have a hard time believing everyone will be happy with whatever comes out of it. But the transmission task force is an important effort. What we've done is set up a NARUC-FERC relationship. It's a formalized task force. There's 10 representatives from utility commissions around the country, 2 from each region, arbitrarily kind of defined, and all 5 FERC commissioners are participants in it. And in my mind, it's the start of a new era of collaboration. Collaboration has become very cliche, and kind of we all nod, yeah, we'll collaborate, then we'll go back and we'll write our comments about what we really think and we'll fight it out. But we're not going to get there on transmission and the way of this modern system without really significant intentional collaboration with the states and other stakeholders. And so my hope for this task force is to put some of these knotty, difficult issues on the table, citing obviously top of the list, cost allocation, obviously top of the list, to start to understand where the pain points are for different states, because they're not the same across the country or within places within states, and then have a non-adversarial proceeding environment where we can start to talk about things. I think even if the result is just a new level of trust as a starting point, that will pay dividends in the proceedings that come before the commission. But I hope that the task force will do a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's exciting to hear, and we're excited to see what's going to come out of that, because I think you're right. That concept of collaboration and partnership is going to be so key, right, as we make the evolution. And building off that, I know that you have FERC, right? You've just kind of your exciting new Office of Public Participation. So when I think about collaboration, I think about input. So I'd like to hear a little bit about maybe your perspective, Commissioner, kind of on that, the role you see it playing, right? How you see stakeholders engaging, because from my perspective, that's it's another voice that's going to allow for that broader conversation and policy development.
Sure. My perspective on public participation in any regulatory process, but at the commission in particular, is let's not be afraid of having more voices on the record. Let's get it all on the record, and we will make more informed decisions as a commission. That will be better decisions. They'll also be more legally durable decisions. But I think better is the important part there. So the Office of Public Participation is something that Congress put on the books in a revision to the Federal Power Act, or I'm going to mix up which act. Anyways, but Congress put on the books in 1978, didn't get done for lots of different reasons. And the appropriators last December, right when I was coming into the commission, said, excuse us, we're giving you all this money every year, and you haven't told us what you're doing about this office that we told you to do several decades ago. So the point is to provide an access point at a very technical and esoteric commission for people who are implicated by our decisions. That connection is intuitive when you think about our Natural Gas Act authority and pipeline certifications and communities being impacted or interested in those decisions. But it's also on the electorate side, to your question about equity earlier. People do care about what the commission does, but they don't know how to come and access us. I think we just hired Ellen Katz, or the chairman appointed Ellen Katz as the first director of that office. She's a former consumer advocate from Connecticut, which I think is she's, in addition to be very talented, her experience lends itself to providing that access point. It's not to create a new set of proceedings or to, some people have suggested it might corral public voices into a separate place. It's intended to get more voices on our record, and I think that will make things better in any case.
So I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So maybe one more question from you.
Okay. So you just touched on a little bit, not natural gas. Obviously, right, that's a big part of your purview as well. And as we sort of think about, again, the infrastructure bill, we think about investment, right, the focus on decarbonization, kind of methane, leak reduction, et cetera. Kind of how do you see some of that playing out in terms of folks coming to you, right, proposing new pipeline, proposing additional investment, right, and balancing that with kind of where we know we're going on decarbonization and climate, and kind of how does the commissioner, how do you kind of personally as a commissioner, right, kind of take all that in and kind of balance that perspective as you're sort of thinking through investment, thinking through projects?
That's about a quick last question. These issues are evolving in real time at the commission. For those of you who don't pay attention on the gas side, we have an open notice of inquiry where we've gathered comments related to the commission's policy on how it certificates or approves proposals for new interstate gas pipelines. it's from 1999, the policy that we're reconsidering or considering updating. It was designed before hydraulic fracturing in the gas industry was commercially cost effective. It's old and it's outdated. And from my perspective, we need to update it. Whether or not a pipeline is needed, which is how we determine whether or not it is in the public interest, is a different set of inputs and equations. The commission, I'm working with my fellow commissioners right now to figure out the details of how that works. But we need to take into account the factors that influence whether or not customers will benefit from the development of new infrastructure. So that's kind of where I start from on it.
All right, Richie, do we have a question from virtually yet? Okay, how about from the audience? Ms. Fiddler.
My name is Shelley Fiddler. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I feel like we've met.
How have you not met?
Yeah, I feel like we have met.
We have not met.
Okay.
So I'm thrilled that you're interested in transmission. I'm thrilled that Melissa asked you a question about natural gas because that is also incredibly important. But I want to speak for the trees here. Not exactly the trees, but the forest and the trees. Markets, RTOs, governance, businesses in the business of development and of consumption, consumers at every single level. All the things you want to get done on transmission are going to have to, in my view, require the commission to get very granular with all those other issues so that we can make progress and we can have change. But it's very difficult to understand how transmission is going to work in areas that aren't in organized markets. It's also very difficult to understand how we're going to have organized markets that work unless we have some changes in governance. I feel like FERC is going to have so many more jobs to do than I think it has ever had to do before. And I wanted to say for this group and these incredibly important players in the market of supplying not just utilities but businesses and our businesses themselves, changing the way we do our energy business. We need FERC in the game, like about at 250% of what you're already doing. Is that even plausible?
You tell me. Every person who works for the commission, like the people who work at the state agencies and at other departments around the government, are dedicated public servants. And we are firing on all cylinders at the commission right now, and I think that's exciting. To your earlier point on governance, there's a lot of issues with governance and stakeholder processes in RTOs, and I used to be a participant in some of those processes, and I appreciate that very much. One thing that is exciting to me is to look at what's happening in the West right now around the potential development of a new RTO. States are really engaged. Utilities are really engaged. Consumer advocates are really engaged. Environmental groups are really engaged. And can they create a new type of organized market structure that hits it right in terms of representation across all the interest groups that want to participate in a regional transmission organization. And I'm encouraged by what I see. We'll see what happens, but I hope that is the case.
Rich, you gave me a thumbs up. Is that, you have a question or one more question in the audience? Here's Larry.
We can do one very quick one.
Yeah.
That's a question.
Larry.
Where were you pointing?
Larry can do one.
Can I do it real quick?
Yeah.
Commissioner Clements, thank you for coming. Pleasure to hear your comments. Larry Beckett, Portland General Electric, and so thank you for your message on the West and what we're trying to create. Something that's happened in the last couple of decades has been focus and transmission. Either you were thinking about interconnections or you were thinking about the IRP process. And so I encourage, again, state commissioners coming together with FERC, trying to resolve. But who's really thinking about what's the best for society, if you want to think of it that way? The broader transmission plans, and leaning on the technical side to somehow say, here are the best solutions to put forward, instead of what have been perceived as pet projects. So I encourage, and I'm interested to hear your comments quickly on how do you bring the technical into this play to say, here are the best projects that need to move forward?
Yep, that's a lofty question. It's a good one. I would go back to the comments I made originally. One is the inputs into planning. There's a lot of debate. You know, if anyone here participates in the Midwest or the Mid-Continent System Operator and has participated in their future studies, or if you remember back to the Eastern Interconnection and Western Connection interconnection planning processes that came out after the Recovery Act was funded by Recovery Act money, where rooms full of stakeholders debated over inputs for a significant amount of time. And what came out was, you know, an okay compromise. Nobody was particularly thrilled, but there were kind of sacrifices or compromises made around the getting inputs within the range of the reasonable. That's a really important thing to happen. But on the other end, to your point, coming out of these regional plans, what is the check on them? And that is my question about oversight. We asked some really broad questions in our advance notice of proposed rulemaking about what oversight might mean. How do we have some sort of check on this? How or what come out of the regional plans or interregional terminations good? How do we know that they satisfy the criteria you just described? And that is an issue that we're trying to work on and figure out how we do something that gets at that.
Well, thank you very much. This is, you know, your purview is enormous and of great interest to this group. So we really appreciate your kicking our conference off today to give us that perspective.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having me,
Yeah.
Ken.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.